Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.
Hello, happy Friday. We are back for another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. I am your host, Namdi Swagu. Always great to be back. So, we started a mini series last week, right? This is the part 2 of the mini series in the online payment ecosystem. Last week was how does it work? Today is how is it secured? So we're going to get into the security of online payment ecosystem and just payments in general and things of that nature. So it should be a fun, enlightening episode. Very excited as always to be here and as always to present this information. Once again, these are it's various aspects of fintech. It's the gift that keeps giving in terms of information and various things to explore. And that's what we're doing. So every week we try to explore a different topic, try to jump into something new. We do the research and we present it to you guys. And then from there, you can further do deeper dives on your own or feel free to ask questions and we'll do our best to answer it. All right, on that note, let's get into some housekeeping. And then we can start. All right, first, so we're streaming live right now from Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitch. We also have a separate stream going on in Instagram. That's when I look to this side. That's the Instagram feed. My people on Instagram, if you want to see the presentation, the different things that we post during this podcast, feel free to go to the techbehindfintech.com and you'll get a link to our one of our channels, other channels. If you are listening to this in the future on a podcast, I'll do my best to describe whatever visuals that we present. So you will be also included and not you won't be out of the loop. So on that note, let's begin. Oh, last thing, comments are always appreciated. Feel free to comment if you're on the platforms of Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitch. Once you comment, I should see it on my screen. And then I can answer it. And I also will post it so your comments will be part of the video. If you're on Instagram, unfortunately, that integration has not happened yet. So I'll take a look over and I'll just do my best to answer your question. Okay, cool. Hey, John. All right. Let's kick it off. Let's start. All right, so as we know, in the technology field, there's been a lot of layoffs. It's constant, so that's the only thing we've been touching base on initially with different companies. So what we're going to talk about today, some big tech layoffs in Yahoo, GitHub, Affirm, Equity. We're going to go into deeper dive into the Affirm layoffs, and then our main topic of the day, online payment ecosystem, and that should be how it is secured. Episode 2 of 2. So last week, if you go to Tech Behind FinTech, you can look at last week's show because we described the overall payment ecosystem, how does it work. This week, once again, it's how it is secured. So first thing we're going to jump into right now. All right, so let's go through it. A few layoffs right now is happening throughout the industry. First one, Yahoo, 20% of their staff, 1,600 employees. Going down the list right now. GitLab, 7% of their staff, that's 130 employees. GitHub, 10%. GoDaddy, 8% of their staff, 530 employees. Affirm, which we're going to talk about, so buy now, pay later. Oh, there was a question on Affirm, and we're going to get into it once we start into the payment ecosystem. One of the viewers last week asked, in the payment ecosystem, how does buy now, pay later companies work in terms of the ecosystem? So we have an answer to that question, and we're going to we shared the answer last week. We're just going to give more color around it. So Affirm, 500 employees, 19% of the staff. Equity B's within finance, 25% of their staff's 24 employees. Zoom, massive layoffs. 15% of their staff, 1,300 employees. eBay, 4%, 500 employees. It looks like a company out in Australia, OpenPay, 100%. So it looks like they're closed down. So let's move forward right now. All right. So what's going on with a firm? So, like you said, 19% of the staff, and it's really so a firm is a buy now, pay later firm. Companies like Klarna, there's a whole bunch of different companies in that space and doing well during 2020. Um, Afterwards, we're seeing a lot of those companies not doing as well. Okay, got some more people joining. So, Laura, Riley, this is Frazier. Instagram. Thanks for joining. Appreciate you guys. All right. So with a firm, right, in the shareholder letter Q2 2023, a firm founder and CEO Max Levchin outlines how the firm grew rapidly over the last few years, especially due to the pandemic, hiring ahead of the revenue required to support the size of its team. It's constant theme with a lot of the technology firms we've seen. They during 2020 ramped up, hired like crazy because business was going so well. Why? Everybody was home. So when people are home, they start looking at their devices. They're leveraging all sorts of apps. So a lot of these companies thought that that was the new normal. A couple of years later, that is not the new normal, and now they're scaling back massive hirings that they did. So going forward, Levchin expects the firm's headcount to remain essentially flat for the foreseeable future, while the company focuses on projects that improve its profits margin and boost repeat customer engagement. They're also sunsetting, meaning shutting down different initiatives, including a firm cryptos unit, as well as delaying project with less certain revenue timelines. According to a firm chief CFO, Michael Linford, the company expects to save between 77 million and 83 million due to job cuts as a result of reduced employee salaries and lease expenses. So that's what's going on with a firm. But we've been talking about this for the last few months, right? It's a constant theme you see with a lot of tech companies, fintechs, and different companies in that space that ramped up during the pandemic when the whole world was shut down. Business was going extremely well. Social media companies, you name it. And what happened was, they thought that this was the new normal, and turns out it wasn't. So now they're scaling back. Also, obviously a lot of stuff going on from a global economic perspective, the war with different things going on that's impacting general economy. So that is what's going on there. Okay, cool. Let's jump into our main topic. But before we do, so there was a question last week. I don't know, my man Jeff Martin's listening, but you had a question around how does the buy now, pay later fintechs work within the payments ecosystem. So let's answer your question before hopping into the main topic. So similar to what we described before, right? We look at the whole ecosystem. Instead of credit cards right now, the buy now, pay later firms interact directly with the merchant. So the merchant integrates with the buy now, pay later. If people don't understand what buy now, pay later, never heard of it, it's essentially from back in the days, you should say layaway, right? But essentially, you want something instead of using your credit card. This firm now allows you to buy your product from the merchant or the vendor, and you pay them directly in installments to pay off your debt. So similar to how credit card works. But in this case, the buy now, pay later firm integrates directly with the merchant. The customer fills out an application, and then through the buy now, pay later option, once they're approved, the buy now, pay later pays for the items. Now the customer has that debt. The merchant is charged a fee, similar to how a credit card would charge them. They're charged a fee for it, and then the customer starts to repay directly to the buy now, pay later. Meanwhile, they have their product. in their hand. So they bought it on credit. The buy now pay later also similar to credit cards. If the customer's late on the repayment terms, they get charged with late fees and so forth. So that question came up from last week. So it was definitely we definitely had to address it and answer it. Gave an overall summary last week, similar to what I just said. Added just a little more details I found out during the week. So definitely wanted to say that. And also, they charge interest and so forth, similar to a credit card. Why would a person use buy now pay later instead of a credit card? It all depends on their credit standing and what they can get approved of. If they're not, they might not be able to get approved for a credit card or whatever. So that's another option of buying things on credit. Okay. Now let's jump into the main topic of the day. So listen, when we talk about security in the payments industry, we will be remiss without bringing up the payment card industry data security standards, otherwise known as PCI DSS. So in the United States, that's basically a standard that anyone who's accepting a credit card and doing these types of financial transactions has to abide by. It's basically a control standard. So if you heard of in healthcare, for instance, you have HIPAA, you have high trust, you have these different standards and controls. And in fintech, you also have some too. So all these are different types of standards. But for payments, though, PCI DSS is extremely that's the gold model. And if we looked at the other side of the pond in Europe, they have Payment Services Directive. They have it's called PSD2. So it's different standards for coordinating payments. So let's get into a couple of bullet points that we have here right now. All right, first, there's a PCI Standards Council. They're responsible for the development and the standards for PCI compliance. These standards apply to any company or organization that accepts, transmits, stores the private data of cardholders, as you mentioned. PCI DSS has 12 key requirements, 78 base requirements, and 400 test procedures to ensure that organizations are PCI compliant. So it's one of those things where let's go through it, right? The Federal Trade Commission, FTC, has responsibility for the oversight of credit card processing as it falls under the need for consumer protections and oversight. While there is not necessarily a regulatory mandate for PCI compliance, it is regarded as mandatory through court precedent. So this is important, right? There's no regulatory mandate, but guess what? If you don't have it, the banks and other companies they could choose not to do business with you. So you're out of the loop. So although they don't, it's not. And I always thought it was mandatory, but according to this, it's not. But the players in the game, right, will just choose to not do business with you. So in a sense, it's mandatory kind of for your business. So you cannot accept credit cards because you need other, as we discussed last week. And if you want to get more knowledge of the entire ecosystem, definitely look at last week's episode because we talked about the whole ecosystem. That's why we broke it up. We're not going to review that today, but last week's episode is why it's a two-part series is around the ecosystem, how all the different parts work together. So if you want insight on that, tune back to last week's show. That was part one of the mini series. But in this case, right, if those players from the acquirers to the different banks choose not to do business with you because you do not have, if you're not PCI compliant, and you have to, you accept store customer data, then you're out of the loop. So that's why it's important. Not only that, if you get breached and you don't have that, it can result in serious fines. So next question, right? How do we become PCI compliant? So this is a high-level overview. There's obviously, from what we talked about before, there's like 400 different test procedures, so it's a whole control. But high level, implement firewalls to protect data, have appropriate password protection, so multi-factor. When we say multi-factor, different layers, not just your password, but also some sort of verification code or something of that nature. Protect cardholder data. encryption of transmitted cardholder data, utilize antivirus, anti-malware software, update software, and maintain security systems on a regular basis. So look, it's important to know, right? Most of these standards, they have some nuances, but a lot of them have similar things, right? When you start looking at, different frameworks within different verticals or even within fintech, from you know SOC 2 or NIST and this is what you understand. This is high level, but a lot of these frameworks have similar controls. And the most important thing is a way to mitigate the risk of getting breached. That's the general concept what they're trying to prevent with these different controls. Um, what's next? So it's a couple of things. Restrict access to cardholder data. Unique IDs assigned to those with access to data, restrict physical access to data storage, create and monitor access logs, test security systems on a regular basis, create a policy that is documented that can be followed. Yeah, it's really interesting to look at these type of things because you just start seeing the nuances and the similarities with other ones. And shameless plug, right? One of the things that we offer as a company is looking at ways to automate these types of compliance frameworks through our partners. So, and when I say we, the show sponsored Strategic Generation. All right, so now let's kind of switch gears, right? And let's look at best practices to secure online payments. But before we do that, let me see if there's any questions from our audience. All right, I don't really see any questions. And since new people just joined, what I'm going to just do a recap on what we're talking about. Today is the second part of our mini series on online payment ecosystem. Today we're talking about how it is secured. Last week we talked about how does it work in the overall. So right now we're talking about different compliance frameworks, which is the main compliance frameworks within the payment system is PCI DSS. Now we're going to go over some best practices, which will be similar to what's part of PCI DSS. And next we're gonna go over some past breaches within the last decade or so that was pretty huge within the industry and cardholder data. As always, feel free to ask questions if you have any questions, or if you have insight on what we're talking about or experience in it. Feel free to drop that. Right, the whole goal is us to learn as a community. I am a mere vessel of the information that I'm presenting to you guys. So if you have any comments and you can provide insight, drop it in, and we will post it and can add it to the discussion. Okay. On that note, let's continue. So, what are some best practices for securing online payments? Let's get into this. Number one, matching the IP and billing address, right? Address verification service, AVS, compares the IP address of the buyer to the billing address of the credit card used to provide assurance that the customer is the card holder. It's very interesting. So, IP address, it's basically your internet provider, and it'll show what's the IP of where you're basically logging in from. Encrypt data, your SSL and TSL connection. So TLS, transport layer security. So when you're sending data, right? So it's two types of things. There's data at rest and data in transit. And when you're sending data in transit, that message has to be encrypted because you don't want outside parties or nefarious actors snooping in and getting that information. So data encryption is a huge best practice. Use payment tokenization. So what does that even mean, right? So credit card tokenization de-identifies sensitive payment information by converting it to a string of randomly generated numbers called a token. So that in the token, info can be set through the internet and payment networks to complete payment without being exposed. So essentially, you are randomizing and de-identifying the information from the credit card, and you're making a token out of it. Therefore, if that information between the different within the ecosystem as it transmits, if it somehow gets in the hands of someone who has bad intentions, they're not going to know what the hell it is. So that's why they use payment tokenization as a best practice. Request the CVV, card verification value. You ever been on a call as I have, and you're doing some type of payment, whether it's online, whether it's over the phone, and they go, "Oh, what are those three digits on your?" If you look at your credit card, it's in three digits. That's your CVV, your card verification value. It's used to validate card not present transactions either on the phone or online. You've paid for anything, I'm sure, online or on the phone. I'm sure you've been asked that. So that's another best practice for securing your online payments. You want to basically validate that a person just didn't get random credit card numbers and they're going on a buying spree without actually being the owner of that credit card. Because as we all know, with different breaches and different downloads, these numbers get hacked, put on the dark web, and it's for purchase. And people sell it, and others use it to start buying stuff illegally. All right, monitor fraud continuously. I think that's the best practice in general, right? Built-in fraud monitoring identifies where there may be real risk of a fraudulent purchase. Businesses can set rules based on their situations and tolerance for risk that limit or reject transactions that are deemed too high risk or require manual approval before the transaction is completed. Next one, best practice, manage PCI compliance. Look, as we just said before, right? And usually with these compliance frameworks, it's like a yearly thing, some are 2 years. Manage it. So if you're a merchant, you are compliant, stay compliant, continuously monitor, do different things, and that's back to a service. So merchants that process, store, transmit credit card data are required to be PCI compliant. The consequences of a data breach for a non-compliant business are significant. It can include costly fines and penalties in addition to significant reputational damage. So you accept credit cards within your fintech or do some payments, you have to be PCI compliant. If you're not and you get breached, hefty fines. And that goes into our show sponsor, Strategic Generation. We offer continuous monitoring compliance automation through our partners. So next best practice, and this is like train employees. Whether it's, I mean, when you start as being in security and looking at a lot of these different frameworks and a lot of best practices, it's kind of ubiquitous. It's like, listen, insider threat is not necessarily someone who works for you intentionally trying to cause a problem. It just may be shit they don't know. They're just making mistakes. They're just doing things that are not secure. And training employees is huge. Um, Provide individuals with the knowledge and skills and enable them to recognize and respond appropriately. When the team understands the secure payment process, they are better prepared to identify the fraudulent activity as it's happening. Use strong customer authentication. So this is not more so. So SCA is more so a European regulatory requirement to reduce fraud. So it's usually, in addition to they build an additional authentication when they're doing the checkout flow. So usually, when you start looking at different modes of security, they always say it's something you know, something you have, something you are. What does that mean? You know your password, something you are, some part of your DNA, like a fingerprint, and something that you physically have. It could be some sort of verification code, authentication code. So, in looking at these different forms, strong customer authentication, that's an addition, but that's not here. So when you start looking at compliance frameworks like in the European Union, like payment services directives, so similar to a PCI, but that's part of their regulation. We don't have that here, from my knowledge. All right, cool. We've been kind of flowing here. I like it. I like it. Let me just check, take a breath, and see if there's any questions. So, quick recap: what we're talking about for those who just joined. Talking about the online payment ecosystem and how it is secured. We went over one of the PCI DSS, which is a control framework that is pretty standard within the payments industry if you store, transmit, or anything around credit card or customer data. Then we went over some best practices. And last, we're going to cover some past breaches that happened. So these are older, going on like 9 years old now, some 10. Target breach was huge. I remember that happened. I was just 2 years out of my doing my going to my master's program for cybersecurity. That was like a huge thing I was talking about. 40 million customers were affected. The hackers gained access and they installed malware on the company's point of sale registers. Even though the company settled for 18.5 million, the total cost of the entire breach end to end, $202 million. Home Depot breach of 2014. That breach affected 56 million payment card accounts. Hackers gained access to the company's payment system by compromising a third-party vendor's username and password. Total cost was 179. So third party risk, supply chain risk. That's what that boils down to. So you have to, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you have to ensure that the third parties that you interact with are have security controls in place, that they're compliant and they have a sort of structure. So doing your necessary due diligence is important. Brings us back to a couple of episodes ago. We talked about the minimal viable security product, right? And that's like an initiative from Google, Salesforce, and various other companies in terms of just getting minimum security standards around vendors, because vendors are a huge risk. So look up that show if you want to learn more about it. Did it a few weeks ago. If you go to our website, you could find it. Tech Behind FinTech. 2019, Capital One breach. So Capital One suffered a data breach that affected the personal information of over 100 million customers, including names, addresses, credit scores, and social security numbers. The breach was carried out by a former Amazon Web Services employee. Total cost is 80 million. Once again, insider threat is huge, and it can be very expensive. So that today concludes our show. Wow. Trying to get these shows down to 30 minutes. I think we're doing it. I'm gonna stick around for a little bit, because what happens is when I start leaving, somebody asks a question and then I'm like, I missed the question. What do I do? So I'm gonna stick around and just do some promos now. So listen, every week we're here at the Tech Behind FinTech, 12 p.m. EST to 12:30. We have a guest that's gonna go over probably to the 45 mark or so. Yeah. Hey, here we go, man. My constant viewers, man. I always appreciate your questions and your feedback, Jeff. Let's see what he's talking about. Happy Friday. Happy Friday to you too, brother. Happy Friday. Thanks for answering the question from last week. For supply chain, I believe there's guidance from CISA now. T-Mobile has been a victim of a lot of breaches in the past few years. CISA has a lot of good information. I know a few weeks ago, like I said before, we talked about the minimum viable security product. So a bunch of private companies came together to basically put forth a standard. So instead of having a vendor, you go to Google, you do business with them, they have their due diligence report. You go to another company like Salesforce, they have another one. They say, why don't we standardize it? It necessarily as in depth as two or a PCI or NIST CSF, but it's just standards. You'll be surprised how many vendors just don't have basic standard security settings set up. And then what happens is every time they go into business now, they're like having to scramble for their due diligence. And the whole goal is to just have something consistent so you can answer the necessary questions. So a bunch of companies came together and said, let's put something out there, because they recognize supply chain risk is huge. So it'll be interesting to see. Definitely. CISA has tons of great information, so you're on point with that. And no problem on the question, man. Like I said last week, the answer I gave was accurate. it just had to get a little bit more in depth because I didn't know that the exactly how that worked in terms of how the buy now pay later firms, they establish their own direct connections with the merchant. So it's kind of they have their so that creates their own loop. So great question, and thanks for asking it. It gave me a chance to research it, so I wanted to know. Let's see, those who joined, man. I give it a second. See if any more questions. Listen, really, really appreciate all the viewership. Okay, and let me talk about our sponsor. Our sponsor is Strategic Generation, offer cybersecurity, compliance, automation services, and application pen testing. So shout out to our sponsor. Hey, Alex just joined. What's up, Alex? Yeah, so that is today's episode. Just to give a quick recap what we talked about. So today was part 2 of our online payments ecosystem mini-series. Last week, we talked about how it worked. Today, we talked about how it is secured. So if you would like to learn more info about that, you can go to the techbehindfintech.com. Links to both sites, both episodes should be there, and a lot more episodes in terms of minimal viable security product that we mentioned in this show and so forth. We just want to give an overview of it and dive in and learn more about it. So that's what we're going to do, covering various aspects of fintech. Like I say, it's the gift that keeps giving. So much information to cover, so many things to learn, and I'm just curious about a lot of things. So I'll be bringing that to you, and of course, bringing guests that's going to talk deeper into certain things as well. But I think that concludes our show for today. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. I appreciate every single one of you. If you can, go to the website, subscribe. We're going to start pumping that out more. So we want to start getting a mailing list so to keep you guys informed of new episodes, upcoming guests, and so forth. And I think that concludes it. I don't see any additional questions. I'm going to end the show right now. Guys, have a wonderful and phenomenal day and an excellent weekend. I will catch you back here next week, Friday, 12 p.m. EST. Take care. Cheers.
Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.